Thanks for staying with us. President Cyril Ramaphosa has signed the South African National Water Resources Infrastructure Agency bill into law. Now it's aimed at helping improve the management of existing water assets. But how far does it go to address some of the water challenges faced by many across the country? Let's speak to Lubabalo Luyaba, South African Local Government Association Water and Sanitation Specialist, Dr. Ferrial Adam, WaterCAN Executive Manager, Ayesha Laher, who is a Water Institute of Southern Africa Non-Executive Director. Good afternoon to you all, and thank you so much for your time. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Adam. Is this a step in the right direction?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to all your viewers. I think it's a difficult one because on the one hand, we know that our water infrastructure, our Department of Water has had 10 years of actually not producing or not doing what they needed to do. So in one sense, it is understandable, but given the history of how our state-owned entities have done in South Africa, we can't help but be concerned. If you think about the fact that in the last 3 years, our state-owned entities have lost something like 325 billion rand. So it is a concern. It's not all celebration. I think we need to be cautious, and rightfully so.
Ayesha, Dr. Adam says that let's be cautiously optimistic. Your take?
I'd say that we must be cautiously optimistic. It's very good to know that there is there is money that is spent on infrastructure. However, there is certain issues that we have to deal with. The first one is that if we're going to build new assets and hand it over to private water services providers through PPP arrangements, they will have to be paid. And the problem is that most of the reasons services is because of the lack of revenue collection and payment. So will there be a revenue collection and payment for these services, for these PPPs to go ahead? I think that is the first issue. The second issue that we need to speak about is that if we hand over the water treatment plants that are being built to municipalities back again to operate, are these capacitated municipalities? So there were a lot of water treatment works and wastewater works that were not functioning, and they were under Section 78 by the Department of Water and Sanitation, and these plants have been refurbished. And those are the typical refurbishments that this infrastructure agency will address. Now, what I would like to know is that infrastructure agency, when they hand over the infrastructure, whether it's reticulation networks or whatever, to the municipalities, will they be doing a due diligence to see that those municipalities can actually maintain that infrastructure, or else they will just be building new infrastructure again and again?
And I suppose that's a comment then, that concern we can put to Lubabalo, because Lubabalo, certainly it is a concern around municipalities. And if we hear, even for example, just yesterday, the Auditor General saying that some of the municipalities are not even aware of their capital assets and they don't even know what they have, and thus making things difficult when it comes to maintenance. So how do we begin to address some of the concerns that Ayesha has raised?
Well, I think firstly, this is a great initiative by the department. I think we must, where we see progress, we must congratulate, and the department has shown itself to be responsive in terms of dealing with the challenges that face the water sector.
Lubabalo? Lubabalo, I think we're having a challenge with your line there. I'm going to ask that we try and re-establish a better connection with you. But let me come to you, Dr. Adam. One of the things that is critical is that very point of municipalities, because if the AG says that they're not going to, they see municipalities are not able to maintain their own infrastructure, they don't know the capital assets they have, and thus putting the maintenance plans at risk. So now you listen to what Ayesha is saying, that if you hand over some of these assets to municipalities who are already struggling, you need to create capacity.
Absolutely, and that links to my point about having the bailouts, right? Where we spent 325 billion bailing out SOEs, and Eskom's one of those. We've spent about 200 billion bailing out Eskom. So So our concern is that when this body was, thought out, it was needed because there was a downward spiral within the Department of Water and Sanitation. Things have seemed to have leveled off a little bit. So now putting this into, it's a few things. One is the skill you need to put into that kind of a body, the additional cost that will have in terms of what the functions between the Department of Water and Sanitation and such a structure. And exactly the kind of thing that you're talking about is that if you listen to the minister's speech a couple of weeks ago, where they talked about the turnaround strategy from the Department of Water and Sanitation, they were still saying that according to law, they have no oversight over local government, and that when the things go wrong at municipal level, we need to then go and hold them accountable as people. So they can't do it as a department. The other thing we need to remember is that a few of our water boards are actually almost bankrupt because they have not been paid for services. Can we, and it links to the point that Ayesha's raising, is that how do we make sure that services are still being provided? Having said that, I'm trying to understand the duplication, because what this agency is trying to do is to bring together Department of Water and Sanitation, the Trans-Caledon Authority, and kind of merge it into one that brings in the Lesotho Highlands project and other bulk kind of supply issues. How do we ensure that we're not wasting money or double paying? And why is it that every time we have a blockage in government, or have another state-owned entity operating?
Quite an interesting point you're raising there. And Ayesha, I'm going to come back to you right on that point, because when you read the statement of the presidency, it talks about this particular fragmentation that it is trying to deal with. But Dr. Adam is raising an important point to say that how then do you ensure that there's no duplication and, in fact, everybody does what they're supposed to do?
So I think, Pompiwe, we have to acknowledge that the establishment of a national agency is a good idea, that we can pool all the experts in one place. There would be, we hope, better fiscal, that will be better control over where the procurement processes. And I think that is maybe one of the areas that the government was trying to address, with all the issues with the large infrastructure projects where there were a lot of cases where you had misappropriation of funds. So perhaps putting that all under one body, there would be better fiscal control. That would also maybe assist to have all the skilled people that you require to actually implement the projects in an equitable manner and in a correct manner. But I think that is also key, that capability may lie with municipalities, but may also lie with water boards as well. So if we do have this water infrastructure agency, which we're going to have, we need to ensure that the people that are working in that agency have honesty and integrity, but they also have the required skills to understand how to implement projects. Because one of the problems from Liwe is that a lot of times water treatment plants and wastewater treatment plants are built by municipalities or other organizations, whether it's MIG funding, RPIC funding, etc., and they're not correct. The technology is incorrect. So the people that are going to be operating this agency must understand, do we need a water treatment plant? And that should be based on the availability of the water quality. One of the big issues I'd like to highlight is that the upgrading of wastewater treatment works is critical, because we know the Green Rock report has told us all the wastewater plants in South Africa, majority have failed. The infrastructure has failed. So if these plants are going to be built and under the guidance of this agency, they need to ensure that the wastewater that they are treating is not industrial effluent. Because if you're going to upgrade a wastewater plant and you don't stop the industrial effluent, which is under the municipality, that biological wastewater treatment works is going to fail.
Yeah.
So we need to ensure that we have the correct skills. And then the question also is that what happens to all the other funding mechanisms that are out there for municipalities, your MIG funding, etc. Is that now going to fall under the same agency, or does it only deal with regional projects or the large national projects.
So, Lubabalo,
we need clarity on that.
Yeah, Lubabalo, hopefully it's a better line to you. Apologies earlier on as we were trying to talk about this, and really, you know, from the conversation, the agency is much welcome. It's a step in the right direction. The important point now is to ensure that the capacity of those who need to execute the work is created.
Yeah, indeed. But I think let's be fair to the department. Let's look at things like the TCTA, which will become sort of absorbed in this agency, and how well the department has run that. Let's also look at the bigger questions that the department is trying to answer around efficiency and unlocking private sector investment into public infrastructure, which they hope to address through this specific initiative. So I think at a strategic level, the department is trying to solve for the question of sustainability and efficiency, at least at a financial level. The elephant in the room, though, is this. Municipalities owe the department about 45 billion between the water trading entity and the water board. We owe Eskom about 60 billion, but municipalities are owed about 313 billion. Of that, 230 odd billion, which is about 74%, is from households. If we don't deal with that, the historic debt and the underlying causes of that debt into the future, the agency will collapse. So we must have those difficult conversations that say, why are we where we are? How do we move from where we are? And how do we fund the water sector as a whole? I think issues of treatment plants, et cetera, those are operational considerations that are quite easy to resolve. There's tough conversations that we have to have as a country around how do we fund this water sector such that it's sustainable, it's equitable, and can be operated in a manner that allows the private sector to participate and play a role that is meaningful. That, for me, is the big discussion point. But we're very hopeful. The new minister and SALGA have already been engaging. The department is always keen to collaborate and work with all of government to find solutions to very complex problems. So we're rather optimistic looking forward.
And Lubabalo, would you say, though, and really what you're raising is a critical point, because it speaks to the revenue generation and sustainability when it comes to the work of these municipalities. Would you say the issue, for example, as you say, of skills is one that is now being addressed by this particular agency? Because of course we're going to get the skills from the department, but when you look at the municipalities, do you say that now we can look forward maybe to skills that can be able to carry this forward as well at that level?
To a degree, yes, but I think we must also be mindful that the department, working with other stakeholders such as SALGA, COCTA, MISA, are doing other pieces of work. So there's also an honest discussion that's happening at the moment that says, has the quality, quantity and impact of the support that has been provided to municipalities thus far been appropriate and effective? I think the answer is a resounding no. So while we call on municipalities to build up their skills, we've got to also ask critical questions of those responsible for supporting municipalities and the entire ecosystem that we've got around building skills and capacity at an individual and an institutional level in the public sector. And those are discussions that are happening and programs are being trialed. So I think the agency is not an isolated incident that's happening. It's part of a broad array of strategies and reform that the department is driving, working with stakeholders such as SALGA, National Treasury, etc. So again, one is very optimistic. You will have seen norms and standards that have been released pertaining to things like skills. What type of municipality should have what type of skills? How do we deal with the issue of process controllers? Also the questions around funding model, etc. So there's lots of reason to be optimistic. I think let's give it a chance, but also everyone in the system must play their role. That includes everyone using water efficiently and everyone paying who should be paying. Because if that fundamental is not done, nothing else is going to work in the system in the final analysis.
And that's the big question, Dr. Adam, because the issue of support when it comes to municipalities is a critical one. But at the same time, the issue of non-payment is a bigger one, because some of these municipalities are on the back foot because simply people aren't paying those who should be paying for these services.
So on the one hand, yes, that is correct. But just a few things. One is, I do think, yes, we can't be totally, pushing this down. But I do think that you have to allow for some amount of concern given the state of our state-owned entities in South Africa, whether they have all the governance in place or not. If you look at Eskom, it was one of the areas that was bleeding us dry in terms of corruption and state corruption, right? The second thing is, in terms of the issues of municipalities not being paid and billing and all of that. We know that there's a challenge in terms of non-revenue water. But having said that, we make it sound as if residents are not paying and that it's all the consumers' kind of fault. But there are also issues with the municipalities that actually don't have their billing processes in place and they don't have their structures in place, so they are at fault as well. The other thing we need to realize is that, in terms of some of the things that I have seen, that a lot of the non-paying aspects are coming from government buildings and government-owned clinics. So, and even the private sector. So it's not just people in their homes and in communities and areas that are not paying. This is about. It's a very complex issue. I agree, and it can't all be placed on one side. But that municipalities have not been able to do the work that they've been supposed to do. And we saw that with the AG's report. So we can't expect that just because we're setting up an SOE, that these things are going to change overnight and this water infrastructure agency is going to be thriving. There are things we need to go in there very open-minded about. And the other thing we need to remember is that if you're calling on other sectors to be involved, there needs to be more transparency. There needs to be open kind of communication. And my other concern, and Lubabalo mentioned it now, which is the issue of giving the private sector free rein, all of that. So on the one hand, they'll say government is the custodian over water, so it will never be privatized. But the service is privatized. So in that sense, it kind of is privatized. Yeah. And we need to kind of think about how that increases the haves from the have-not in South Africa, in a country where only 46% have a tap in their home.
Sure. And that's quite an important conversation there, especially when you think about the fact that, this is supposed to ensure that there is, security when it comes to water in the country, particularly maybe over even the next decade, and improve, the capacity to expand bulk water infrastructure, as well as the maintenance of, when it comes to existing water assets. So it's going to be an interesting one to watch. But thank you so much to you all for your time. That was Lubabalo Luyaba, South African Local Government Association Water and Sanitation Specialist, Dr. Ferrial Adam, WaterCAN Executive Manager, Ayesha Laher, Water Institute of Southern Africa Non-Executive Director.